My regrets, and I don't have many in business, but my regrets are not what I've done. It tends to be what I haven't done.
Hello, my name's Nathan Brake. I'm the creative director of VidMedia, a creative content agency. It's my privilege to welcome you to Legacy Conversations. This channel exists to share the journeys of incredibly successful individuals, to pass on the lessons that they've learned, the mindsets that they've adopted, and the disciplines that they've developed in order to get to where they are today. My hope is that in sharing these journeys, we can learn from them and apply these same principles to our own growth in order to quicken it, so that we too can create lasting legacies. This week I'm speaking with Stephen Simpson. He's the owner of Winter Simpson Print. I've been blessed to be mentored by Stephen for the last couple of years, and I'm always amazed by his just passion for business, for growth. No matter the size of the challenge, Stephen will always face it and find a solution. It's remarkable, and there's so much in this interview, so valuable. Enjoy. Stephen, thank you so much for being here today.
No, delighted to be here.
You've got a very interesting story. You're obviously very successful. So maybe we could go back to kind of childhood and hear about what kind of values were instilled in you as a boy.
Childhood's an interesting experience, because I actually think childhood really does affect the way you act for the rest of your life. And my childhood was a very settled childhood and a very good childhood. My mother and father were reasonably affluent, and they were very good parents, very attentive parents. I had two siblings, got a brother and a sister, so there was three of us. And the one thing I've always found throughout my life is the middle child syndrome, which I have an interest in the middle child syndrome, but I think that was a major defining point of my childhood, was having an older sibling who I felt got a lot of the attention, and a younger sibling who got a lot of the sympathy, and I was the one in the middle. But it was a very happy, very settled childhood, and my parents set some very, very good examples for me.
What were some of the things that you learned from your dad? Because did he run his own business at that stage?
My dad ran his own business. I was weird to say I wasn't close to my father, but that's not quite how I'd put it. We had completely different interests. My dad, I've always been very interested in sport. I've always been very sporty. I've always had far too much energy, and my dad was the exact opposite. So when I was wanting to go and play football or play tennis, I didn't get much encouragement, if I'm honest, and it was left to my own devices quite a lot. My dad was quite serious. He was heavily involved with the church. He was a church elder and a lay preacher. So I came from a very Christian background, right. And my dad put a lot of his energy and efforts when he wasn't working into the church. That's a memory I've got of him always being away to the prayer meeting, or running a Bible class, or something like that. But he was strict and had strong values. But when I say strict, it wasn't a physical, strictness. It was just a rule strictness in terms of both the way you behave and also the rules around the house of, you help in the house, you do the dishes, you clear the table before you go out to play, you do your homework before you go out, and you are back at a certain time. So we've always had that sort of authoritarian type thing in my background, which I think helps later on in life as well.
Okay, well, that's good. And as a boy, what kind of things did you dream of? What did you think I'm going to achieve as an adult?
My memory is of never having a settled view,
Right.
but I guess a lot of kids are like that. I can remember at stages of my life, like, oh boys, I want to be a footballer, or I wanted to be a pop star. I remember having more mundane thoughts, like I wanted to join the traffic police, which was an ambition for a while, and I can remember meeting people who were in the army, and thinking, oh, maybe I would like to join the army. But I didn't ever have one settled dream of, oh, I want to be a doctor or I want to be a lawyer. And I kind of drifted a bit through school like that. I didn't feel we ever got a great deal of career education at school. I don't know if that's changing nowadays, but our career guidance wasn't particularly great, even in terms of what subjects you chose. So it was more a case of almost drifting into what I was going to do when I left school.
Okay. Do you feel that school was a place where you kind of thrived and enjoyed, and did you enjoy exams, or what was school like for you?
Exact opposite. I enjoyed school, but the reason I enjoyed school was the social side of it. I enjoyed my school friends, always had a healthy group of school friends, and enjoyed the company. I am absolutely positive that if I'd been at school today, they would tell me I had something wrong with me, ADHD, probably, because school bored me. I always found school unchallenging. I got into trouble quite a lot, usually for nothing bad, but just not paying attention, mucking about in class, that type of thing. And I'm totally convinced, when I look back on it now, and I see it in younger kids now, I just had far too much energy. I had far too much drive to be doing something else rather than just sitting in a classroom answering questions. I've also got vivid memories of finding a lot of what we're doing far too easy. And I know that can maybe sound quite big-headed, but it was true. We used to get 20 minutes to do exercises, and I was mucking about after 10 minutes and getting into trouble. And the reason I was mucking about after 10 minutes, because I did the exercises in 5 and got full marks. And that is something I distinctly remember. I honestly believe I was never challenged by school, and I did okay at school. I left school with 4 hires, so I wasn't good at school, but I always felt I could have done a lot better if I really put my mind to it, and I felt I was never hugely encouraged and hugely challenged.
Did you ever get any labels put on you?
I suspect more so in primary school than secondary school. I was probably what you would now call a challenging pupil, a disruptive pupil. I can see that in myself. I can see why that was happening. I can almost rationalise it now. I think I needed to be challenged more at school, and I can see that now when I look at other kids, particularly I see it in my grandkids. Sometimes the schools are just too one-paced, in my opinion, and they put 30 people in a class, and they've almost got to work to the pace of either the slowest, which is maybe a wee bit unfair, but maybe they work to the pace of the average. And the high achievers just find it too easy and not challenging enough, and they either channel that extra energy and the extra time into their schoolwork and advancing themselves even more, or they end up doing what I do, which we did, or which was get a wee bit bored, so tended to be a wee bit disruptive.
Oh, that's interesting. It's a shame that you no one saw that in you and looked to kind of establish it more. And I guess with that kind of energy, were you quite competitive? I've
always been hugely competitive in anything I do. It's an interesting competitiveness, because it's not the competitiveness of, say, an Andy Murray, where I play tennis and I want to be the world's #1 and the absolute best, because I've never really had the determination to greatly succeed at one thing. So I've always participated in lots of different things. So I play tennis. I don't play it to a desperately high standard, but I want to do as well as I can, and I do want to win. If I get annoyed, it's usually with myself. I never ever get annoyed when I lose to somebody else. I only ever get annoyed at myself. But there is a huge competitive spirit there, and if you speak to anybody who knows me, that's one thing they would tell you. I don't like to think of myself as a bad loser, and I would say I'm not a bad loser, but I do like to win.
And is that something that you noticed from very early on, or did you realise, oh, that's what this is within me? And how is it kind of managed, or do you just let it run?
I think I use it positively, because if I do something, I want to do it well. So when I take up a new hobby or interest, I do tend to immerse myself in it and try my very, very best at it. And I've always basically taken that attitude into work as well. If you're going to work, whatever you choose to do in life, if you're going to do it to the best of your ability, and you're there to do it well. You know, so don't just play at it. You know, so learn, work hard, do it to the best of your ability. Is something I've always put into most aspects of my life.
Brilliant. And so, kind of finishing up with school then, when you left, what did you have your sights set on?
When I left, I think the only thing I really remember about leaving school was the desire to leave school. So I actually improved when I look back on it, I think, all the way through my school life. So I was probably a more problematic and harder to handle pupil when I was younger. And then by the time I got into secondary school, I was starting to play the game a bit more, and I certainly wasn't getting into as much trouble as I got into when I was in primary school. I absolutely recognised the need to pass exams. So I was able to focus. I had an ability to perform when it mattered. So I wasn't great throughout the school year, but I was actually incredibly hardworking in about the month leading up to exams. I've always had this ability to, I reckon I passed my French O grade, and I reckon a month, I failed my prelim miserably, and I could not speak a word of French. And I had to plead, I remember this well, I had to plead with my French teacher to be allowed to sit the actual exam, because I think I got 29% in my prelim. And I said, please let me sit this exam, I will pass. And I reckon I learned all the French in the month leading up to my exam, and enough to pass with a B in my O grade. And that was definitely all crammed into a very, very short space of time, because I put my mind to it. And that just kind of summed up my mindset at that age, where it was a recognition that I wanted to achieve it, and I was going to have to work hard to. And when I got that mindset, I was able to focus for that month. And I was literally one of these pupils, one of these people that for 11 months a year I was out, never doing homework or anything like that. The month leading up to exams, I was pretty much in my bedroom, study, and had the ability, short-term memory retention, so the ability to study hard for a month and pass exams.
Wow.
So I stayed on to fifth year and passed my hires. I remember having to be persuaded to stay on to fifth year because a lot of my friends were wanting to leave school at age 16 after O grades, as it was at that time. I was persuaded to stay on to sit my hires because I'd done so well in my O grades, and everybody saying, look, it's be a waste, you're obviously capable of doing this. But some of my friends were out earning money. So this is sort of between 16 and 17 years of age. So I sat my hires, and all I remember at that stage was being absolutely clear in my own mind, I did not want to go into further education. So the idea of college or university was just something that I'd totally dismissed. And again, that was really against my parents' desires, wishes. I was heavily encouraged. I was actually being heavily encouraged at that stage by the school, who were saying, "You're obviously a bright kid, and if you've got these four hires."
Yeah.
But I just had no interest in further education.
Wow. So where did you go?
Again, a slightly interesting story about how you drift into something that you maybe don't intend, but it opens up doors. My parents said to me that they wanted me thought I should think about college or university, and I certainly wasn't sitting about doing nothing. And I was basically given the summer holidays, so I would have left school in the May, and I was basically told get a job or go to university. Wow. So the key thing for me was to get a job. I'd always had a wee hankering for the police for some strange reason. I don't understand. There's no particular reason for it I can put my finger on. It's not like any member of my family was in the police force, but I always thought a police force would be good. So I applied to the police. I also applied to 2 jobs where there were adverts in the paper. One was for a bank and one was for an insurance company, with no real interest in either. And almost immediately I got interviewed by the insurance company, Commercial Union Insurance Company as it was then, and they offered me a job more or less straight away as a management trainee.
Wow. And
I needed to get a job to avoid having to go to college or university, so I accepted and went into insurance and absolutely loved it, absolutely thrived. So I was 17 years of age. Again, an interesting story. I remember I started on the 1st of July, I just turned 17, and there was a supervisor who met me on day 1 and was showing me around. And he said to me he said, I started on the 1st of July as well. He says, interestingly enough, this is my 10th anniversary. I've been here 10 years. And I distinctly remember thinking, well, there's no way I'll be here in 10 years' time. My mindset at that stage was, I don't want to be insurance. This is only going to be a stopgap until I find what I want to do. Yeah. But I absolutely loved it. I thrived from day 1 in a work environment.
And it's interesting that you were put immediately into management kind of training. What do you think they saw in you, and did you recognise it yourself?
I think at that stage it was an interesting time for Commercial Union because they had a graduate management intake programme where they had been taking on very highly qualified graduates. They weren't even just taking on, I'm not hugely into I can't remember the degrees, but they weren't just taking on somebody who had a degree. It had to be a really first class degree. And their success rate was abysmal because what they were tending to do was pick the real elite because that's what they want for their management team. But these people didn't stay. So their management trainee course that they'd been running for the previous probably decade hadn't been as successful as they'd like by taking on university graduates. So I was a wee experiment, not just me personally, but in that intake, they'd made a decision that they were going to try and take on a small percentage of management trainees who they felt had done really well at school but had decided not to go into higher education. I think, when I look back on it, I think I got the job because I was so nonchalant at the interview because I didn't really care whether I got the job or not. And I think I came across as somebody who was sitting there saying, I'm bored with school, I think I could do a lot better. I'm not going to higher education, but I'm definitely of higher education standard. And they obviously saw something that they thought would make that I could be successful. And so I joined with 5 or 6 other people. We all started on the same day as management trainees, and they were all graduates, and I was the only non-graduate, and also obviously because of that I was the youngest. Wow.
And during that kind of training, is there anything that kind of stood out to you, or anything that you remember and still implement today?
There's lots of things that I remember about Commercial Union that at the time I didn't appreciate how they were helping to form my management style for the rest of my life. The commercial union training programs were incredibly good. When I look back on it, they took the management trainees like myself and they immersed us in training rather than insurance. And I've often joked that I know very little about insurance, and it's true, because we went from one department to another department. We did 4 months here and 4 months there, learning all sorts of different things about running a business. So we never got immersed in motor insurance and only motor insurance. So you learn a wee bit about motor insurance and you move on to life insurance, and then you move on to accounts or whatever it happened to be. So I learned a lot in the first few years. We got sent on some great training courses that I still remember 40 years later, 40 odd years later. So, some of the content of these courses, because it made such a mark on me. So yeah, commercial union, it was a great company to work for, and they looked after their employees, well, particularly the management employees, well, and the training, I say, was first class.
Wow. And how long were you in insurance for then?
I was in insurance for 17 years, and to some extent it was, again, an interesting thing in my career progression. I was possibly the victim of my own success, because what happened very quickly was I realised that to get on you had to be mobile and self-motivated, because this promotional system within commercial union, which was very good, was adverts were displayed on a notice board from all over the country. And so basically you could look at an advert looking for a supervisor down in Exeter, and you could apply for it despite the fact you're based in Dundee. And you didn't have to ask anybody's permission to apply for it. So it wasn't the kind of system where you went to your boss and said, I'm thinking about applying for this job in Exeter, would you approve it, or something like that. You just put in an application, and it was up to Exeter to decide whether they were interested in you or not, to a large extent. So there were a few things like that I learned how to. I often look back on it, and I've used the expression "play the game," and in a lot of ways, working for a big company, it was playing the game, and I learned very quickly how to do a lot of that playing the game. So I was very successful. I thoroughly enjoyed my time at Commercial Union. One of the things, and again we'll maybe touch on this later, I always think when you speak to people about successes, you can sometimes be seen as big-headed or arrogant when you talk about what you've achieved or your success. But when I look back at my time in Commercial Union, I was good. I know I was good. I was better than anybody that they took on in my year group, who were all the graduates. I know from my progression, I was the youngest ever, district sales manager in the country. I was the youngest ever branch manager in the country. So all these things, when you look back on it, there were the achievements that I can be proud of, but they actually were signalling the fact that what you had was a very young, energetic, ambitious young man who was prepared to move all over the country to fulfill his ambitions. And it worked well for both parties. I mean, I think I was very good for Commercial Union, and I think they were very good for me.
So what made you so good at it? Was it the energy? Was it the willingness to move?
I think there was a combination of things. The energy and the desire to be the best I could at work definitely made a difference. And I could give you numerous examples where I learned very early on that I wanted to stand out and be different for the right reasons rather than the wrong reasons. And I just think I learned very quickly that I needed to work hard. I needed to impress the right people. Another strong thing I've always believed in, it was something that somebody, it was one of my very first branch managers told me. I moved through to Edinburgh and there was a darts league, and all the young guys, bear in mind I was maybe 19, 20 at the time, used to go to the pub next door to the office and play a darts league at lunchtime. And of course, what tends to happen when you get into that environment is your 1 hour lunch, and we're on flexi time, so we could work, if we took a longer lunch, we could work it up, come in early or work it late, but your 1 hour lunch drifts into 1.5 hour lunch, and before you know it, you're having 2 or 3 pints at lunchtime, and then you're not coming back focused on your work. And I remember my boss, when I moved through to Edinburgh, just saying, he didn't say don't do it, but he was basically saying, if you get involved in things like that, you just need to be very, very careful that you don't start going the way of some of them. And I remember having a real think about that and thinking, yeah, I see where he's coming from. He was very much, don't be scared to be outside that group. He said, I know you're 19 and I know you want to be friends with all the young guys in the office, and I know you probably want to create a social life through the office because you just moved through from Dundee to Edinburgh. But he said, take my advice. He said, if you associate with winners, you'll be a winner, and if you associate with losers, you'll be a loser. And I'm not saying these people are losers, but I'm just saying they're maybe not the best role models. And that stuck with me to this day. And it's something I've spoken to many, many people about, something I've said to my kids as well. And it does harp a wee bit back to when you think back to your school days, and your mum and dad telling you, now don't you go and play with him because he's the bad boy in the class. And there's a certain element of truth with that thing about the people you associate with, if you are not careful, particularly if you're easily led, lead you in a direction you don't really want to go. So I've always looked to, anywhere I go, I look for role models. I admire people. I admire people who succeed. I admire people who do things differently, or have a good outlook, and I try and pick up on these positive things.
That's very good advice. And so, what was the point at which you took on Winter Simpson Print? Obviously, you're doing so well in insurance.
Yes. Sorry, I mentioned earlier, probably a victim of my own success. So I was very mobile within Commercial Union. I was promoted. I worked there. Ended up working there for 17 years. I was probably promoted 12 times in 17 years, 11 or 12 times in the 17 years. Ridiculous examples. Just to give you an idea of that, I was promoted when I was 25. I was the youngest ever assistant sales manager down in Birmingham city centre. So a Dundee boy, used to the Edinburgh environment, suddenly thrown into Birmingham city centre in a brand new job. I was promoted. It took me, at that stage, I could buy a house quite quickly because I was tending to go down and thinking, I'm not going to be here forever, so that house will do. So I remember buying a house. I had the house 9 months in Birmingham, and I was on the move again. So we went through all the expense and hassle of moving from Edinburgh to Birmingham. I was 11 months in the job. I had the house 9 months. 11 months later, I was promoted again. And I look back on that and think, how can you do that? Because with the best will in the world, how could I have demonstrated that I was doing a great job and fully on top of this job? But I went from being an assistant sales manager to a full sales manager in 11 months. The downside of that was I moved my kids down from Edinburgh down to Birmingham, and in a new school, a new environment, and then a few months later I'm saying, great news, I've just been promoted again. And whilst it was good news for me, it wasn't particularly great for the family. So I went through many, many years of that. We had 7 or 8 house moves in about 12 years,
Wow.
11, 12 years, and that of course meant kids' education was getting disrupted. And in my the latter job, I was down in Reading, just outside London, and my daughter was maybe 13, 14 at the time. So you're starting to think about schools, starting to think about secondary education and exams. She was going through a wee bit of a tough time, and you start to question how much you're responsible for that, because she was so unsettled. Every time she made friends, I moved her away from them, and so I was looking for a bit of stability and the opportunity. My father had run a small print business in Dundee, and had basically had been chatting to him one day, and he was mentioning that he'd had enough and he was planning on retiring. And I honestly hadn't ever thought about leaving Commercial Union or running my own business. But it just got me thinking, and the conversation he was reflecting on how good the business had been for him. He worked at it all his life. He did 41 years in the print business, and I could tell he was a bit sad to be giving it up and talking about selling the family business. But that wasn't the main motivation. It was just when he was talking about how it had been good for him, it had given him a comfortable living and the stability in Dundee. And it was an interesting conversation, because he was in the conversation. Bear in mind, we're now talking about probably a 58-year-old father speaking to a 40-year-old son, or whatever it was, 38-year-old son. And he was, whilst on the one hand he was saying how glad he was that he'd been settled in Dundee and what he'd done, he was also slightly envious of, he's saying, you're doing well, and it's you've had a chance to get out of Dundee and see a bit of the world, and it's good on you, son, kind of thing. And ultimately, when I went away and thought about it, I actually thought, yeah, the idea of settling down somewhere and maybe doing something for myself quite appealed.
It's interesting to hear how you arrived there. Looking back to kind of the slight disruption to your family and moving so often, was that something that you were deliberate with, or did that just happen through, I want that promotion and whatever it takes? How did you kind of balance the hat of a father, husband with success?
A very, very good question, Nathan, because I think it's one of the hardest things, particularly in business, but it's one of the hardest things in life to do. If you have this drive and the burning desire to succeed, you need to be very, very careful that it's not done at the expense of all others. I've always been very lucky in that my wife Carol's always been very supportive of the fact that I'm driving this career, so she has to drive the family. So she's always, she has worked and had jobs during, particularly when the kids were younger, but there was always this understanding that it was a secondary thing, and that my career and my job was the main thing. And she greatly supported me. So when I'm working hard and all these long hours, she basically ran the house and the kids. When I look back on it, she was very supportive, because when I said to her, great news, I've been promoted and we're moving to Birmingham, a lot of wives might have been sitting there saying, not again, not doing it, just not doing it. But she was always very, very supportive of that. But yes, I think you do need to be very, very careful that you are taking into account how your wife and your kids are thinking about these things. I don't have any regrets, but I understand now a bit more about what my kids probably went through, because moving school and moving friends and things like that can be very traumatic. And it's strange, because that was not my childhood. My childhood, as I mentioned earlier, was in Dundee. It was very static. I spent the whole of my childhood in the same house, with the same friends and the same neighbours. So my childhood was completely different from my kids. But my kids are good, and they're both doing very well, and they're both really nice, well-adjusted individuals. And I suppose from that point of view, I can look back and think, well, I can't have done it all wrong. I do sometimes think maybe if they hadn't been quite so well-adjusted or doing quite so well, I wonder how much, I may have had regrets or questions how much I may have contributed to that. Who knows?
That's very interesting. And so making that transition then from being employed by an employer to then taking on your own business, particularly with as a family, did you feel any kind of tension, stress, or was it fairly easy? Were you excited? What was that like, that transition?
The transition was a whole mixture of emotions. It was definitely exciting. It was nerve-wracking. I was very confident. I didn't ever feel I wasn't going to succeed. I felt confident that, despite the fact I knew nothing about printing, I felt confident that in my own abilities, particularly in my management abilities, through everything I'd learned at Commercial Union, I did feel confident. So I was never scared that I was going to the company was suddenly going to go bust the next day or anything like that. My memories of that time were probably one that, as sitting down with my wife Carol, and probably sitting there thinking we will never be as well paid again, because I was well paid at Commercial Union. And I distinctly remember, thinking we're probably going to, I took a drop in salary, and there were, because you're coming as managing director, you're no longer looking at this ladder that I've always looked at Commercial Union, thinking, in 2 years' time I could be there. So it was our earnings will be much more limited, but will probably be much more stable, get the kids through. We were very comfortable at that stage, so the earnings weren't quite so important. But yes, I do distinctly remember thinking this is a bit of a step down. It's a bit of a step down, and I mean, when I was latterly, the project I ran in Commercial Union, I think there was about 100. I was in charge of about 150, 160 people. The budget was about 52 million. So this is what I'm doing, and all of a sudden I'm sitting there contemplating going to run a print business in Dundee with a turnover of 500,000 and 7 employees. So it was a bit of a total change in culture, but I had got my head around that, and so excitement, maybe a wee degree of nervousness, but as I say, I felt very comfortable in my own ability. And as a family, we were relishing the fact that we could get back to Dundee and have a base for a good few years to get our kids through the basically through their exams.
And did you have any kind of pre-notional thought of, oh, this is my dad's business, I need to do it the way that he done it, or I need to be careful about this and this, anything like that? Or were you able to just be like, this is how I'm going to do it?
I definitely spent the first 2 or 3 years feeling as though it was my dad's business. It was a strange experience. My dad retired after 2 months, so we had a 2 months handover, which was what we agreed with him. And then he said he would leave me to get on with it. And boy, did he do it. I mean, he literally, after 2 months, he walked out the door, 28th of February, I remember it well. I started on the 1st of January, just after Christmas, and on the 28th of February, he said, that's 2 months up, over to you. And I thought, he'll be in on Monday, or we'll see him again next week sometime. And he never stepped foot in the place for a good 2 or 3 months. He never asked me any questions. He didn't ask me anything about how the business was going. He said, if there's anything you want to ask me, you know where I am. And that was it. So it was a kind of strange experience. But my dad was well known. He had been running it for 40 years. He was well known by the customers, by the staff, and just generally. So I spent the first couple of years, having to introduce me, you're Webster's son, and your dad was a great man and a hard act to follow, and so I had this for a couple of years, never really feeling it was mine, and it's strange because I paid for it. This is quite an important point, and it is an important point because it was a limited company. There were shares. My dad's plan was always to sell it to supplement his retirement. He put a value on the company, and I paid every penny of that. I left when I left Commercial Union. I picked up a very healthy redundancy check when I left, so I handed all that over to my parents as part payment, and I paid every single penny of the purchase price that my dad had set on the business. So it wasn't that I'd taken, been handed the keys to the family business. No, I paid for it. It's my company. But I never felt like that for probably until about 2 years in. And then it probably took me a good 2 years to feel as though it was my company and I could start making the decisions I wanted.
Wow. That must have been tough.
I don't think it was. I look back on it almost as 2 years wasted, if I'm really honest, rather than tough.
Right.
But it's probably very unfair because I was learning about print. I think when I took over, I started learning the things that straight away I was like, well, why have we done it that way? I definitely wouldn't have done that. I was slow to make changes, and in hindsight, I should have put more of a stamp on it straight away on the things that I felt we could do differently and better. But there was a definite, it's my dad's company and I better not change this or I better not change that. So yes, I probably look back on that first 2 years as A, learning period, but B, maybe one where I should have actually been my own man slightly more.
It's really interesting just in terms of thinking about the learning, that you went from insurance that you were very established into print, which you didn't know anything about, but yet you were still excited about it, but you knew nothing about it. What was the element that kind of drove you, that you were excited about and knew that you could be successful with it?
I think there was a few things. A challenge, definitely. I think in a big company environment, I wouldn't say you're protected. It's almost like working for the government. You come in, it's a big company, they're paying your salary at the end of the month. You don't have to worry too much about, honestly, you don't worry that much about profit and loss when you work for a big company. It's not your responsibility. You can't really, unless you're right at the very top, you can't affect it. All you can do is come in and look at the area you're working in and do it to your best of your ability. It was a completely strange environment going to a small business where all you focused on was turnover, the need to get the sales in, and profitability, the need to make money. And these were the absolute key issues. And I was obviously, because I'd been in a big business, I understood turnover and I understood profit and loss and margins, etc., etc. But until it's your business, your own small business, you don't really focus on that quite the same way. And I found that a sort of very interesting change in my mentality, to be thinking much more about how we drive sales, how we drive profitability, because it wasn't something that I paid as much attention to at any stage in any job when I worked for a commercial union. It was profit and loss was somebody else's problem, not mine there.
Wow, well, that's very cool. Yeah, very different.
Yeah,
that's you.
Yeah, I can remember very early on. Just some to give you little examples of that. At Commercial Union, I used to get sent to go to meetings all over the country, or a training course, and my thought process would be, I've got to go down for a 2-day training course down to Maidstone in Kent. I'd be working in Edinburgh at the time. 2-day training course down in Maidstone, Kent, on report writing. Great, I'll be getting tick my box, I've done my report writing. They would fly me down the day before, put you up in a hotel. You'd had 2 days in a magnificent training centre down in Kent, because the Commission had a really good facilities down there. Do your report writing training, fly back up, you'd missed a week of your work. The cost of that, you know, when you look at the cost of that, it's hugely significant. Never crossed my mind when I was with Commercial Union. I go and work for my own company, and one of our big customers in London, this happened very early on, a big customer in London, and they said, we're working on a new project, can you pop in? And I'm in Dundee, and it's like, can I say no? And I thought, no, I better not say no, I can't pop in because I'm in Dundee. And it does give me an opportunity to meet them, so I better go down to London. And you suddenly start then looking at, oh, I'll just fly down for the day. And it's coming out of your pocket, and you look at how much it actually costs to fly from Dundee to London for one meeting that you don't even really know what the meeting's about. And that's when suddenly you're saying it's a whole different thought process, because you're like, this is going to cost me, back at that stage, 500 quid for the day, for one meeting in London. And you're really questioning about, is it worth it? What am I going to get for it? If I'm going to go down, it has cost me £500. I need to make this work. So I need to prepare well. I need to sell. Totally different mentality. And that just kind of summed up. Never thought like that when I was with Commercial Union. Never thought. I just thought, oh, great, I'm away on this course. Never gave it a single moment's thought about how much the investment was, how much it was costing. And that was probably the biggest difference between working for a big company and working for yourself.
Wow, that's cool. I like that. And did you have any kind of mentors or people that you would go to get advice at any kind of stage?
Always. All throughout my life, all throughout my working life, a big piece of advice I give to everybody I meet when we talk about business is, the more you think you can do it yourself, the less likely you are to succeed, because you can't. Whatever your problem is, somebody's gone through it before. Somebody's got the right answer and somebody's got the wrong answer. So speak to people. I've always spoken to people, taken advice, certainly asked for advice. Ever since, again, going back to my early days in Commercial Union, I can remember the very first boss I had, and I can honestly remember looking at her, so it was a she, and almost assessing, I like this, and this, because you do it really well, and I don't like that, and that, because you're hopeless. And see, when I do it, I'm going to do all that, and I'm not going to do that. And that's been something that stuck with me virtually throughout my working life. I've never met a perfect boss or a perfect mentor, but you ask for advice, and most people have got some positives, and if you speak to them, and you usually can get little nuggets there that you can take out of it. But it doesn't necessarily mean you want to be an absolute clone of that person. I've had quite a few bosses that I thought did brilliant things, and they were the worst bosses in the world. But if you just pick up on the brilliant little things of the brilliant bits of advice they give you, or the brilliant things you look at and you think, that is so smart, that's so clever. So I've always looked at people, whether they be my peers, bosses, other people who are successful, and spent a wee bit of time. It's always interested me, but how's he managed that? How's she so successful? And try and pick up on the good bits. Yeah. But the advice bit, yeah. So mentors. My advice to anybody starting out is never be scared to ask for advice. The more people you speak to, particularly about problems, because it is very true, that a problem shared is a problem half. But sometimes when I've got a problem, when I'm struggling, think, what am I going to do with it? You can get help from the most unlikely source just by talking to other people, and they'll just say something mundane like, have you thought about this? And you think, what a great idea that is. And sometimes, particularly with problems and issues, you can get mental blocks quite easily. You get stuck. You just get, your brain tends to go down one route and not see other opportunities or other possibilities. And you just sometimes need to be speaking to other people just to get that little bit of advice. So yeah, it's definitely something that I've all my working life I've never been scared to ask for help, never been scared to ask for advice. I'm one of these people that sees good in everybody, so even when you're bad, you've got some good points, and I always look and try and take the good points and try and learn, and yeah.
Amazing. That's great advice. Thank you. And what would you say then, kind of taking all these pieces of advice and looking at others, how has it formed your leadership style?
It's an interesting question about even defining a leadership style. I think I've got quite an interesting leadership style, because part of my success in both insurance and print, and this is absolutely not a false modesty thing, is how little I know about it. And particularly if I focus on building up my print company, I'm not really that interested in the detail of print. I can't actually operate any of the print equipment in my factory. There's a lot of things go on in my operation. I don't even really understand quite exactly how it works. So I've always had a leadership style that says that's your area of expertise. So, for instance, if I employ a studio manager to run my studio, I leave them to get on with it. I expect them to immerse themselves in their knowledge of the studio and artwork, etc., etc. And I expect them to run their own department and improve their own department. If they want new bits of equipment or whatever, I expect them to come to me to say, our department needs this. So I'm very much in, if I give you a job, I give you clear guidelines about what I expect from you, but it's your department or your job. You're the expert, not me. And I very much have this leadership style of leaving you to get on with it, expecting you to get on with it, and leaving you to get on with it. I like to think that you get a lot of respect for that, because there's nothing worse than the boss trying to tell you what to do when everybody clearly knows that the boss doesn't know nearly as much as the employee. So I've always tried hard not to fall into that gap. But I just think it's treating people with respect. If it goes a long way.
And have you seen results in that?
One of the things I'm incredibly proud of when I look back on my whole time running my own businesses is I've never given anybody a written warning. All my staff have stayed with me. We don't tend to lose staff. We've got so many staff, it's actually now getting problematic. So a lot of the team in the Winter Simpson are actually getting about my age, so we're all starting to think about retirement. But that's, basically because they've all been there for years and years, and you've got to, as a boss in a working environment, you've got to be looking and thinking, well, the environment's got to be good and the leadership style's got to be good, because if it's not, people leave, people move on, and the fact that they are remained with the company, you've got to take a lot of positives from that and say, well, we must be creating a good environment, a good place to work, and a good team if we're all so tight-knit that none of us want to leave it. So that's, possibly when I question anything about leadership style, that's one of the things that says, well, you can't be doing it all wrong, because if your staff are so loyal and again, it maybe sounds big-headed, but I absolutely know they speak highly of me. They enjoy working. I get told that regularly. It's a great place to work. So we're obviously creating the right environment throughout the place.
Brilliant. Well, that's great. How do you go about approaching challenges?
Head on. And again, it's probably a piece of advice for anybody who is setting up or new to running their own company, is problems don't go away. Problems need to be solved, generally. So when something's going wrong, don't put your head in the sand. It just tends to get worse. It's a fact of life in any problem in your life. So the earlier you tackle a problem, generally speaking, again, the easier it is. So when there's been a challenge, when there's been a problem, I've always wanted to solve it, get it sorted, and move on very, very quickly. So any problems I've ever had, particularly in my working life, that's always been the philosophy. It's just like, let's get this sorted, and let's get this sorted now. Whatever we need to do to resolve it, let's try and resolve it today.
I've always been amazed in our interactions how you are very kind of solution mindset, and it's always very optimistic. There's nothing that's too big, or you never go into the negative. It's always, let's find the solution and that will be great. How did you kind of develop that and remain kind of positive, even though some challenges may just seem horrible?
Some of it is definitely down to experience, because you've been through it before, and there's no point in getting too hung up about it. To me, a large part of life is about being positive. It applies in all aspects of my life. I think that positivity is important for your own well-being. I think it's very important for my well-being, being a positive person. I think it's also very important for people around about you, and particularly as a boss. You're there to set an example. And if you're all doom and gloom and moaning, and life's not going well, and tomorrow's going to be even worse, it just creates a picture for them of doom and gloom, and tomorrow's going to be even worse. So I think having that positive outlook on life, even when today isn't brilliant, the positive outlook that says, recognises today isn't brilliant, but let's get through it and let's solve the problem, because tomorrow will be better. And focus what energy you've got on the positive tomorrow rather than the negative today. It's just a general way I feel about life. Every time I see a negative, or something's going wrong, I usually manage to turn it around into a positive and think, oh well, this time tomorrow, if we do it this way or that way, we could actually improve or get better or grow or whatever it happens to be. So I think that mindset, then it keeps you positive, but also keeps everybody else positive. So it is a very definite something that I do, and I'm unconsciously do. I know if I'm downbeat as the boss, everybody will be downbeat, because generally that's what happens. So to me, it's an important thing that even when things aren't going brilliantly well, that you're the one who needs to lead from the front and put the positivity and look for the light at the end of the tunnel. Because if you can't find the light at the end of the tunnel, nobody else will.
Wow, that's very good advice. What advice have you received that has made the biggest impact on your business?
Probably the big thing I would again say to anybody who is either thinking about setting up their business or is new in business is to have the courage to make things happen, because in all my life that's something that I feel I have seen numerous examples where I've met people who've maybe had great ideas and have not made it happen. I've met people who I think have had good opportunities and have not grasped them, and often they've not taken the opportunities because other people have almost talked them out of it, not because of their beliefs. And I always think, what a waste. And I think it's interesting, if you think about our relationship, Nathan, when we first met and you were thinking about setting up your own company and going your own way, I think you'd made up your mind. I don't think I helped hugely in that process, but I think you were just needing somebody else to sit there and say, yeah, go for it, follow your dreams. You've obviously given us enough of a thought process that it's something you want to do, so make it happen. And I sometimes think, and again, it's maybe just associate with positive people, but getting that kind of encouragement, it just helps probably get the decision over a line that you'd almost made. Whereas if you'd spoken to somebody who's sitting there saying, "Oh, I don't know about that," so you're giving up a full-time job and it's a bit of a risk and all the rest, they could almost persuade you to go the other way.
Yeah.
So I think it is, if you feel it's right and you feel you've got that opportunity, follow the dream and go for it. My regrets, and I don't have many in business, but my regrets are not what I've done. It tends to be what I haven't done. And by that, a couple of little examples. I mean, I've bought a number of businesses, as you know, because we've built our company through acquisitions and mergers. There's not a single one I regret, but there's one or two I didn't get, and they're the regrets. Should I have pushed a bit harder? Should I have done a wee bit more to try and get that deal over the line? So my business regrets, if you like, are things I haven't done, not the things I have done. And I'm a great believer in that. Go for it. If you're thinking that it's the right move and you think it's what you want to do, have the courage of your convictions. Give it a go. You're unlikely to regret doing it. You're probably more likely to regret not doing it.
Well, brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so you're at a point where your son Kenny is doing well in the business now as well. Have you got kind of thoughts about going back to your days of remembering, you see it as your dad's business? Do you have any concerns about him seeing it as his dad's business? And how do you kind of try and navigate that and help him with that?
Another very good question, and another very challenging situation, because I absolutely know that Kenny will get the same comments that I get. Your dad's a great guy, difficult act to follow, etc. He will struggle for a period of time for it to feel like his business, or for people to treat him like it's his business. I need to work really hard because it is hard work at times, to remember to sit there and say, "Oh, you need to speak to Kenny about this. It's nothing to do with me now. I'm no longer the managing director," because the tendency is for people still to come to me with issues and for me to make decisions. So I've got to work incredibly hard to make sure that I try and take the backward step. But it is not easy. I'm not going to lie to you about that one. I think family business it's a completely different subject. It's an interesting subject, but it's a different subject from setting up and running your own business. But the only advice I keep giving to Kenny is be your own man. I mean, it's exactly what I would say to any other budding young entrepreneur anywhere, is, have the courage of you make the decisions. That's why you're managing director. It's your business. You're in charge. You decide. Don't be, if you feel it's right, go for it. If you don't feel it's right, don't go for it. But by all means, take advice, because as I mentioned earlier, I think that's important. But don't let other people persuade you or dissuade you from doing something that you feel fundamentally is right.
What do you think your dad would say, knowing that his grandson was taking on the business?
I think he would be incredibly pleased that the business has remained. In fact, it's not I think, I know, because we spoke, but my dad passed away 4 or 5 years ago now, but laterally in his life, when he was reflecting back, as you do tend to when you get older, and particularly when he probably knew he wasn't going to be around for too much longer, he was very reflective of his life, and I think he took immense pride in the business. He took immense pride, I know, in the fact that I'd come in and done so well, and the business had grown substantially during my period in charge. I think he'd be absolutely delighted to know it's going forward again, and it's still a family-run business. Yeah, he'd be delighted.
That's very cool. And what's next for you?
Retirement is something which I'm finding a challenge, because I've still got an energy. I've still got ambitions. I've always enjoyed work. It's something we haven't yet touched on, but from the day I walked through the door at Commercial Union, I've always enjoyed work in a way I never really felt at school, but I've always enjoyed work. I've always enjoyed the challenges, and I still do. And don't get me wrong, there's certain days that I don't wish to work, and I don't enjoy going and work quite so much, but I still enjoy the challenge, and I still get wind of an opportunity, and it excites me. I've got a few projects on the go at the minute, and I'm as excited about them as I've ever been. And to a large extent, I hope that doesn't diminish for a long time. So I certainly don't see me retiring fully. I've got the best of both worlds because because Kenny is running the business. I can walk away from all the day-to-day hassles and mundane things within the business, and basically focus on what I want to focus on, and the buying and selling, the acquiring, the wheeling and dealing, but I still find exciting. It's still there's big opportunities out there, and it's funny. People will say to me, "Print's a declining market," and it is a declining market. There's less and less ink being put on paper generally, so print is a declining market. There's a lot of printing companies struggling at the minute, but that gives opportunities. It gives a lot of opportunities, particularly for the good companies, and that's where that's where I believe Winter and Simpson are, and where I believe we can remain. So we want to be, still maintain that. I want to be the best printer in Scotland. I want to be the biggest printer in Scotland. That was always my ambition, and it's not changed.
Very cool. I love that vision. And with being so successful, obviously, financially, you're probably a lot freer to be able to do things. Is it hard to find a balance in time to be able to enjoy the fruits of your work versus still be, I need to work? How do you get that balance?
I never really think about it. I know I'm comfortable. I've been very fortunate that way. I'm not hugely. I like my toys, so I do like having. I'm not going to lie about the fact that with business success, you are aiming for financial success, and it does enable me to indulge my holidays, my hobbies, my holidays, my love of cars, but I'm just as happy staying in a bothy somewhere in the middle of nowhere, climbing a mountain. And to be honest, I'd probably be happier there than in a 5-star hotel in New York, if I'm really honest, which is a slight dilemma with my wife, who would rather be in a 5-star hotel in New York. But I think if you only focus on money, you will not succeed. Most people who I know have succeeded, they focus on other things and money just follows. If all you ever think about is money, profit, you'll probably make the wrong decisions. So do the right things and money follows, but if you're just chasing the money, it probably something will go wrong. I know that maybe sounds a slightly complex thing to say, but it's the absolute truth. I don't focus solely on driving out as much profit as I can. I honestly think I could have made more money. I could have been more ruthless. I could have compromised some of my business principles and had more personal wealth. I could have taken more money out of the company and not invested as much money as I have in the company. But these things didn't feel right for me. And a good example of that is, within the last 3 or 4 years, I've put £1 million plus investment into an extension and a new press, so that the business is geared up for the next 10, 15 years. I didn't have to do that. I could have said, I'm 60 years of age, I want the money, I'll find a way of taking the money out and put it in my own pocket, but I don't think like that.
And I was going to ask as well about kind of how you go about, or how you see yourself. Do you see yourself as a risk taker, and is taking risks a good thing?
I think to some extent you've got to be a risk taker if you are setting out in your own business. Risk doesn't necessarily mean chance. You took a risk setting up and leaving a paid employment to run your own company. If you've done your homework, if you've done your research, if you've done your preparation, but yes, it's still a risk, but you've to a large extent mitigated the risk. I've never ever put my life on the line. I've never ever hawked everything for the one big deal. I've always looked at worst case scenario, what happens if this goes wrong? Can I withstand the investment or the losses? So yes, there's been elements of risk, but it's always been well managed and just not putting all the chips on the table.
So if you could go back all those years to Stephen at school, what would you say to yourself?
The main thing that I would say to anybody is when, and you get this advice from older people, is when you get to the latter stage of your life and you're reflecting back, you don't want to have any regrets. So go for it. Do it. You know, if you've got the dream, whatever your dream is, if you've got the ambition, you will not regret giving it a go. You will regret if you don't give it a go. So I think that would be my advice. But when I look back to my younger self, if I changed anything, you don't know how it would change the rest of my life. I sometimes look back and I genuinely feel bad about some of the hassles I had at primary school. Bear in mind, I'm a wee boy, but my mum and dad had a tough time getting called down in front of headmasters and, you know, on a regular basis and things like that. I wish I'd behaved a bit better at school, but maybe if I'd behaved a bit better at school, I'd been a completely different person and I wouldn't have had this entrepreneurial desire to do things my own way. I think I've always been slightly anti-authoritarian. I don't like being told what to do by anybody, and which is generally true in life. And that obviously was from day one at school. If that had been kicked out of me at school, it probably would have changed the whole way I think about things. And being your own person, I think, is very, very important. So that's probably again a piece of advice for anybody who's thinking about setting out their own business or in their own business. Is be your own person.
Brilliant. And finally, Stephen, what would you like your legacy to be?
Legacy is an interesting thing because you don't really think about it, particularly about yourself. I mentioned earlier my father passed away 4 or 5 years ago, and I thought that was an interesting experience, if that's not a strange thing to say about your father's death, in that when you go through like something like that in your life, you have people who come up to you and express sympathies. It's what we do, but the genuine good feelings and genuine messages I got about my father really touched me. I mentioned earlier that my father was a devout Christian. He did an awful lot of good work, heavily involved with the church, incredibly well thought of. Nobody, I can honestly say, I've never heard anybody say a bad word about my father, and whether that was his friends, his family, his colleagues, or his staff, and I think that's goes through my mind. My legacy is I'd be much happier for people to say he was a nice guy rather than he was a successful guy. I think it's more important to me that that he added something to my life. He was a nice guy to be with. He was a fun guy to be with. He was a great guy to work for. I'd be happy with that rather than be saying, oh, he was minted, or he's made a lot of money or whatever.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you.
As always, so much learning in there, so much just valuable experiences to kind of pass on and share. So thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on Legacy Conversations. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it beneficial. I'm looking forward to the next one.